Good morning, everybody. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, and I pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. So good morning, or as Senator Canavan might say, buongiorno. It is good to be here in Queensland, a great Labor state with a great Labor Premier, Anastasia Palaszczuk. And it's a pleasure to be back here in Townsville, where last year federal Labor won for the first time since 1993. And of course, I was jogging along here this morning. Jim Chalmers and I went for a run along the Strand. Lots of friendly people yelling out g'day and good luck. Jim, of course, turned to me and says, geez, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty popular here. This is the home of a terrific federal MP now, Cathy O'Toole. She does a great job, doesn't she? And of course, you've got great state MPs, Coralie, Scott, Aaron, and you've got a very hard-working local mayor too, Jenny Hill. Labor's doing well in this area and they deserve to. As Cathy said, I've spent a fair bit of time up here. And since the election, I've been back plenty of times, meeting with apprentices and teachers at Tech NQ, at the Trade Training Centre at Bowl, talking to doctors and healthcare workers about how we deal with the scourge of ice. And of course, I've been holding town hall meetings talking with people with all of their issues. The Community Centre at Kerwin, Heatley Secondary College. In fact, though, this is what I and my Labor team are doing right around this marvellous country of ours. We're listening to local people about what matters to them. And when we hear a good idea, we're acting on it. That's why we led the way, both state Labor and federal Labor, on a new world-class stadium for Townsville. I remember being lucky enough to have a ticket to the NRL Grand Final in 2015, and what a match that was. But after JT kicked that golden point, he got up to collect the trophy and he said, "We need a new stadium." This must be the only time in sporting history a premiership captain's made an infrastructure demand of hundreds of millions of dollars in his acceptance speech. But Labor has. Labor state and Labor federal offered to match. We did the work, we put up the money, and we dragged the LNP nationally kicking and screaming to support this measure 5 minutes to midnight. They too supported the stadium. But that's what we've been doing, I think. We're leading the debate. Last time I was in town, I pledged $200 million for the construction of a new hydroelectric power station, Burdekin Dam. This is backing another great initiative from Premier Palaszczuk, creating 150 jobs, generating enough electricity to power 30,000 homes. And federal Labor also has promised to invest a further $100 million to improve water security for Townsville and the region. Townsville's a go-ahead community, just needs a little bit of backing. And if we can sort the issue of water security, then I think there's nothing holding Townsville back. And in fact, that analysis is what drives me everywhere. It's what drives my Labor team. How do we create good local jobs? And we know that Queensland deserves a better deal from the Liberals nationally when it comes to disaster relief and mitigation. In the wake of Cyclone Debbie, I had the privilege of visiting Bowen and Proserpine, Rocky, Emerald, Airlie Beach. The devastation was remarkable. But even more remarkable was the courage of the people doing the cleanup. These are people not looking to be called heroes, they just run their businesses. They just have their homes, they just live in that community. It is what you do. The Queenslanders I met, they were getting on with cleaning up. They were getting on with rebuilding. It's one of the great qualities, I think, of this state, and dare I say it, the whole nation. That when we hit hard times, we get up. When we fall down, we get up again, we bounce back, we actually roll up our sleeves, we get on with the job. So it is well past the time for the federal government to do its part, to show the same guts, the same heart that the Queenslanders affected by this natural disaster are displaying. Queensland requested $110 million to repair the damage that this state had suffered. Whilst that is a lot of money, it is actually not that much money compared to the cost of the damage, compared to the need to get back on its feet. But the Liberal Nationals have left Queensland $81 million short. Shame, shame, shame. People on Hamilton Island, they're still living in the washed out basements. They've been told they can't get a builder till Easter. How on earth can people get back on their feet if you have a government who's not interested in their plight, who turns up in the military helicopters full of the paraphernalia of government, has the photo opportunities and is not seen since? That is not leadership, and it lets Queenslanders down. We need to back Anastasia, and we're going to do that in Canberra. And as you know, it's not just about clean-up and recovery, it's about prevention. Mitigation reduces damage. It lowers the cost of insurance premiums for families and business. It's why, for example, the Labor government will deliver $25 million in conjunction with the Rockhampton Council and the state government to build that flood levy, to create the local jobs, to protect over 1,200 properties and cut insurance costs by about $4,000 a year. And where there are other good value for money, job-creating projects, a federal Labor government will get behind you. Delegates, at the next election, Labor will be putting forward an economic and social program to tackle what I put to you today as the biggest social and economic problem of our times: inequality. This means, under a future Labor administration, more affordable housing so people can live close to where they work. A world-class education from the early years to school, to TAFE and to university, to give our next generation the best start in life. Better public transport. And we want to close the regional divide, the digital divide, between the regions and the capitals with better internet and good jobs for young people outside of southeast Queensland, so not everyone has to leave home to get a job. And we will be closing the gap for our first Australians. And that includes enshrining their voice in our Constitution. And because we are fair income on climate change, we will ensure for our policies that we'll have cleaner, cheaper, more reliable power for families and for businesses. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten it. We will protect Medicare against every Conservative attack, because every Australian deserves quality, affordable health care. But when you think about that list, from an equal go for our first Australians right through to climate change and energy prices, housing and jobs and education and health care, all of that can be summed up in Labor's approach, which is a fair go all round. It is what unites everyone at this conference. And a fair go all round, tackling inequality, refusing to cross the road and ignore unfairness on the other side of the street. This is not a proposition that we borrowed from overseas, as some in the Conservative media care to say. It is not something that we've recently discovered after the UK election. That idea was born in Queensland at Barcaldine over 100 years ago, and we've never lost sight of it. Tackling inequality is a mission as old as our movement. It's about who we are. It is about where we've always been. We in the Labor Party have always been on the side of fairness, of progress, of not leaving people behind. And speaking of our identity, that sense of Australia, our sense of what we can be in the future. Today I announce that a Shorten Labor government will take the first real steps to have an Australian head of state in our first term in government. We will put a simple, a straightforward yes or no question to the Australian people. One question: do you support an Australian republic with an Australian head of state? Yes or no? And we will let the people decide. I believe the answer will probably be yes, but we will let the people decide. And let me say, this does not change our respect for the Queen for her service. But we are not Elizabethan. We are Australians. Our head of state should be an Australian too. It is time we just got on with this, and we will. Delegates, last year I spoke at your conference. I said that Federal Labor had 3 major economic priorities for Queensland: jobs, jobs and jobs. And I'm here today to deliver on that promise. Queensland is on the doorstep of the fastest growing region in the world. You are a beautiful, marvellous, welcoming state. You are the natural destination for a rising Asian middle class with new money to spend. And we can do this and tourism better than anywhere else in the world when we set our mind to it. Boosting tourism up and down the coast in the regions in Queensland's big regional cities. It is crucial to creating jobs and to growing the economy of Queensland and Australia. But it is not inevitable or certain that just because we're here, that we will attract our fair share of tourists. We cannot rely on the luck of our geography or the beauty of our nation alone. We have to make that luck work for us. We need to show a degree of foresight and planning and promotion. We need the best facilities, we need the best infrastructure to showcase the wonders of your home and bring people here. At the moment, Australia is number 7 in the world for tourism competitiveness overall. But we are number 14 when it comes to infrastructure. Cruise tourism is growing at 20% per year, demanding better access. Airports in the north are seeking to expand to cater for more traffic and more passengers. Without world-class facilities and amenities, Queensland and Australia will miss out on these visitors and the opportunities for Australians that come with it. Yet in the last 2 years, the federal LNP's $5 billion Northern Australian Infrastructure Fund has sat idle. It has done nothing, helped no one. And if that wasn't bad enough, as of this week, Barnaby Joyce is now in charge of it. Just when you thought you'd shipped him off to New South Wales, he's back. When businesses and communities are crying out for more support, more investment, more talk and delay isn't good enough. So today I am pleased to announce at this conference that a Shorten Labor government will put $1 billion of this fund exclusively and specifically to work for tourism infrastructure in Northern Australia, a tourism boom. And this is only the beginning, not the end for our plans for tourism and jobs in Queensland and the North. Anthony Albanese and Jason Clare will sit down with my Queensland team, with the state government, with local communities and local businesses to identify the best projects. This is the future that Labor wants to build in partnership with Queensland for your whole state. High quality jobs, high quality training, high quality infrastructure, new opportunities for businesses in regions and businesses on the coast. We don't want to just be good enough in this country. We want the best in the world for our tourism industry, and when we have the best in the world for our tourism industry, then that will only just be good enough for Queensland and Australia. Now, as we've said, friends, we are the party of creating jobs, creating them and maintaining them. But we're also a movement dedicated to good jobs, jobs you can build a life around, secure jobs with fair pay, jobs that you can come home safe from at the end of your shift to see the family you love. But right now, Our economy is not working for working people. There's 750,000 of our fellow Australians, we've learned this week, who are holding down 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. There is more than 1 million Aussies who monthly record they would like more hours of work than they can find. There are 3 million plus of our fellow Australians in part-time, casualised and insecure work, all too often underrepresented, all too often underpaid, and all too often too afraid to complain. It's why, as for instance our colleague Wayne Swan has been saying for so long, inequality is much more than a gap between the rich and the poor. It is about inequality in our system. In our tax system, we have a 2-class tax system, where most Australians fly economy, they claim their couple of vanilla deductions if they can, but beyond the curtain, there's a whole different tax menu available for those very lucky and wealthy Australians who can claim as much as they can to opt out effectively of paying tax. So inequality to me and to Labor means tackling the unfairness. Having more than one tax system in this country is deeply unfair to all those millions of our fellow Australians who can't choose to opt out of paying tax. We want one set of rules in this country, clear, simple and fair, where access to the rules doesn't depend how much money you bring to the party to begin with. Closing these loopholes, as we have been doing from superannuation for the high end, the unsustainable tax concessions, closing these loopholes and negative gearing, unsustainable. Closing loopholes for accountants' deductions and closing more as we will unveil in coming days. It is based upon the premise that why should a childcare worker who may be fortunate enough to earn $50,000 pay more tax than a millionaire in this country? How can this be described as fair? But inequality, as you know, goes beyond tax. You and I also know that inequality is about wages and conditions, inequality in power and bargaining, in safety at work and security at work, inequality in the pay gap between men and women. Inequality affects us all, and it erodes confidence. It erodes that sense of the fair go. It erodes that generational DNA proposition that we'll always hand on a better deal to our kids than the deal we inherited from our parents, the generational contract that every Australian generation will always hand on something better than what they received. And it is why, with all of this inequality in the workplace, not just the tax system, but in the workplace, the work of the trade union movement is never done. Changing technology and this new gig economy is not an excuse for stripping workers of their security, their wages and their bargaining power at work. In our movement, we believe in making change work for everyone, explaining to people where they fit in, not letting people be left behind. And there are new threats emerging to the fair go at work as we speak. As any of the union reps here know, there's been a massive and disturbing increase in the number of wage agreements being terminated at the Fair Work Commission. There were 156 terminated in 2014. There were 491 terminated in 2016. And we've seen it here in Queensland with Horizon back in April 2015. 12 agreements covering 6,000 workers were terminated, putting them all back on award conditions. Wage cutting isn't just happening in penalty rates, it's happening across the board. These agreements, for the record, included prohibitions on forced redundancies. These were agreements which workers had negotiated in good faith. They'd offset pay rises to get these other terms, so they'd effectively paid for this condition. And then the system just cut them off at the knees. With no compensation, with no, how do you feel about this? This is not fair. When you look at this agreement, what happened with Horizon, let me unpack it further, the story. Horizon then, once they got rid of the prohibition, cut 300 positions in Central and North Queensland, 181 workers in the maintenance workshops at Rocky, 126 train crew positions phased out in central Queensland, replaced by 70 contractors. And as bad as that is, it hasn't stopped there. This scenario we are seeing is being played out right across the country now. It isn't just being confined to one sector. The massive gap between award conditions and agreement wages creates a real incentive for employers to simply cut the agreement deals or to threaten agreements to extract an agreement which, whilst is not the award, is far lower than the existing terms and conditions. In good faith for 20 years, Australian workers and their representatives have bargained. And in good faith, so have plenty of employers. But how on earth can a good employer who's happy to pay the conditions in the agreement keep doing that if their competitor down the road is having their wages and conditions cut? It is a system designed to lead to a race to the bottom. In the Griffin-Cole decision, the termination of the agreement by the Commissioner, reverting workers to the award, had the effect of cutting workers' wages by up to 43%. And let's not use percentages. As dramatic as that number is, that doesn't tell the story. Imagine if all of you had a cut of $50,000. People set their lives up on certain propositions and amounts. You just can't simply cut people's conditions by that without causing remarkable harm and pressure. The pressure when the worker goes home to explain to the family that the kids can't go to that school. We'll have to send back the second car which mum drives. That we can't afford to have that holiday we think we were doing. And it goes on. The mortgage payments. When you start cutting the wages of well-paid workers, you just have that race to the bottom, not only in that workplace, not only in that worker's pay packet, not only in that family, but in that community. At the moment, it is simply too easy to terminate agreements when negotiations stall. Bad news for workers, and as I said, bad news for all those good employers who try and do the right thing. So where does this lead me to? A future Labor government will put the balance back into bargaining so we can get the wages up, get the productivity up, get the confidence humming in the community. It is why we will reform the Fair Work Act, so that instead of making it easy to resort to the nuclear option of terminating agreements, employers and employees are encouraged to find resolution on a level playing field, not with a gun to your head. And of course, if we're talking about standing up for fair pay, it means fighting back against exploitation and wage theft. On Tuesday this week, a Brisbane 7-Eleven operator was found to have underpaid his staff, 8 staff, by around $20,000. But it's not just 7-Eleven. We've seen wage theft in the Queensland ag sector, from Ipswich to Innisfail, the Lockyer Valley and Bundaberg. And when the Fair Work Ombudsman audited 266 businesses in Cairns, Innisfail and Mission Beach, they found 1 in 5 businesses were not paying their employees correctly. And these are just the cases that we know about, the people who've been caught. Wage theft is a widespread and growing problem in our nation. Not just for the employees who are being ripped off, but as I've said, families, communities, the broader economy are all damaged by wage fraud. The Governor of the Reserve Bank himself has confirmed what the union movement's been saying for a long time. There is now a crisis in low pay in this country. It penalises the good employers, it drives down wages and conditions for everyone. It is why Labor will increase the fines, will impose new penalties on companies who rip off their employees, and will make sure the protectors of the safety net, the Fair Work Ombudsman and the unions, have a better line of sight to be able to detect and prevent exploitation before it becomes the drastic calamity we're seeing all too often. And while we're at it with about inequality, we'll apply the same tough approach to dodgy labour hire firms who exploit workers. Right now, Australia has one of the highest rates of labour hire employment in the OECD. A quarter of these businesses are based here in Queensland. Now, if you're in the fortunate position of supplying specialised skills, being able to choose when and where and how you work, that's fine. But for too many labour hire workers, it means an insecure job, unpredictable hours with rosters that can change at little notice, if any. It means worse conditions. It means less training, if any, and it means lower wages. How on earth can people in these industries make a decision about trying to hope to get a mortgage, make a decision about being able to afford to finance the car, make the sort of financial decisions which allow you to settle down and form families? How on earth, if you're a person in your 50s and 60s, you've been made redundant, and you're forced to go and hold the stop-go sign on the side of a big civil works job, and you have no say? And I'm sure you are like me when you talk to, especially, but not exclusively, older workers in labour hire. There is that quiet desperation in their eyes. This is not what it was meant to be. It was not meant to be the case that when they're in their 60s, they're doing more physically demanding work for less conditions. It was not the deal that they were promised. Now, we want people to be working, but there must be dignity at work. So this is why we have such respect for what Queensland Labor's been doing in terms of labour hire, and for all those companies who try to do the right thing. There are still too many predators out there, too many dodgy operators using the legal protection of labour hire to minimise the workers' comp, to avoid the consequences of unfair dismissal, to undermine the wage and bargaining outcomes of in-house employees. And of course, then there's just the straight illegality. Massive underpayment, poor safety, exploitation of low-paid workers, and of course, sexual harassment in many of these cases. People dudded and intimidated, people injured at work. And the $2 companies who go into liquidation as soon as workers or their representatives try and enforce their rights and entitlements. And what does my opponent do about this? Oh, he's got a lot to say about the CFMEU, but he's very, very quiet about the exploitation of hundreds of thousands of low-paid workers. What a hypocrite. And I do think you should be proud of the way the Queensland government's been leading in terms of labour hire licensing, and we want to see nationally how we can introduce a national scheme which reflects best practice, not a race to the bottom. And while I'm at it talking about unfairness in the workplace and inequality, I want to give you another solemn promise today. A new Labor government will reverse the arbitrary penalty rates cuts of every award where the penalty rates have been cut in this recent decision, full stop. And we will legislate to protect the take-home pay of Australians in the future, so it's protection for all. The Prime Minister tries to hide behind a whole lot of talk. He doesn't want to interfere with the independent umpire, he says. Not his decision, not his problem. That's his philosophy. No care, no responsibility. I'm only the Prime Minister. What do you expect me to do about it? But last year, when the Road Safety Remuneration Tribunal made a decision to back in safe rates for truckies, the Prime Minister didn't just overturn the decision, he abolished the whole tribunal. So he's happy to interfere when it suits him. He just doesn't see that the problems of everyday Australians are anything to do with his out-of-touch existence. And let's just talk about safe rates. It was not just unsafe, the rates, and it was not just unfair, the decision they made. It's the pressure it puts on drivers to take risks, to cut corners, to make ends meet. And since this government abolished safe rates, the rate of fatal crashes involving articulated trucks has increased by 7%. A recent study by Macquarie University has found that 1 in 10 truck drivers work over 80 hours a week. 1 in 6 owner-drivers report that drivers cannot refuse an unsafe load. And 42% of owner-drivers say the reason that drivers don't report safety breaches is because they're just afraid of losing their job. This is not right, this is not fair. And I think that the first priority of industrial laws should be the safety of workers. But this is a government more interested in creating a second set of rules for construction workers rather than preventing deaths on construction sites. So for the sake of productivity, the sake of fairness, the sake of safety, a Labor government will repeal the rotten ABCC. This government love to attack unions, and when they do, they're actually attacking the ability of workers to be represented, to exercise freedom of association, but they're also attacking job security, they're attacking fair pay, and they're attacking workplace safety. Whether it's industrial diseases like that dreadful asbestosis, or unsafe cost cutting like hazardous cladding on high-rise buildings or on nursing homes or on shopping centres. And of course, there's the terrible story that we've seen here, right here in Queensland, with the re-emergence of black lung. A committee has found that workers were repeatedly told that this disease had been eradicated. But many health checks were being performed by underqualified people who more often than not sent affected workers back to work. People were reluctant to speak up because they're afraid of losing their job. But Percy Verrill, the first Australian diagnosed with black lung in 30 years, simply said this, and I quote him directly: "It has buggered my life. If I go outside, I can only walk for about 3 houses and I'm buggered and I have to go back. My lounge chair lies down like a bed and I go back and lie down on it. It takes me over an hour to start feeling good again." But what did One Nation's Malcolm Roberts have to say about this? He blamed the union, he blamed the workers. That's the kind of people that Pauline Hanson picks for her party. That's the kind of viciousness that Mr Turnbull and the Liberal Nationals will give their preferences to over Labor. We are better than that, and a Labor government will work with your state to improve industry standards to limit workers' exposure to coal dust. This is all about inequality, friends. Today I've outlined to you our commitment to jobs, our commitment in today's address to boost tourism, to make this the #1 destination. But we can't advance this country and make the good plans unless we tackle inequality. Now, when we've been raising inequality, the government sent out poor old ScoMo, the Treasurer. He came and said, the Treasurer said, about 6 weeks ago, he said, "Oh, I feel your pain." But 6 weeks later, he found that too hard to keep manifesting. So he came out with a new line: "No inequality to see here, inequality's a lie." And then, of course, not to be outdone, your member for Bowman, down in the southeast, Lamming, he said this week that inequality was just another way of saying you don't have a jet ski when your neighbour does. The LNP complain about class war, but they always miss the point, don't they? They're the ones who believe in conflict. They believe in dividing the country, in pitting one set of Australians against another. They think that if you look after the top 1%, if you look after the very wealthy, that the crumbs from that table will look after everyone else. We have a different view. We think it is class war when you cut Medicare. We think it is class war when you cut education and make it more expensive to go to university. We think it is class war when you make it hard for workers to get a pay rise. We think it is class war when you casualise and create insecurity and you send jobs overseas. We have a different economic story in Labor. We always have and we always will. Our story of Labor is a story of working and middle-class Australians. We know that if you look after the regions as well as the city, if you help people in times of natural disaster, that if you spend a bit of government money to get people back on their feet, if you provide the best TAFE system, the best universities, the best options, if you give working and middle-class people the opportunity, they'll grab it. Oh my word, they'll grab it and they'll do wonderful things. Mr Turnbull says that because we won't decrease the top tax rate for the top 2% of tax earners, he says that we are taxing success. Far be it from this gentleman to remember they introduced the new tax rate for a budget deficit levy. They haven't solved the deficit, they've made it worse. But there's a more fundamental point here. And friends, this is, I think, the key distinction between my United team and that rabble in Canberra running the government momentarily. It is this. They say that if we want to not give tax cuts to the top companies, if we think the very wealthy should pay their fair share of tax, they call that a tax on success. But that definition, you note, of success is how much money you have. That somehow success is defined by your mansions, by your bloody jet skis, by whatever else they think is what people gets them up in the morning. But I and Labor have a different definition of success. If you are a police officer on a median wage of $65,000, you're still a success. If you're a childcare worker looking after my kids and everyone's kids, you are a success no matter what you earn. If you are a teacher in a secondary college in Townsville, making sure that the kids from the troubled backgrounds get their chance to get an education, you are a success. If you are a truck driver on the Bruce doing the long shifts, you mightn't make a lot of money, but you are a success. My goodness, you are a success. The Labor Party knows where we stand. We know what we stand for, and we stand together. We stand together with the union reps and the community reps. We stand together with the people who pay their fair share of taxes, and we stand with the people who are good neighbours. And we don't believe that the length of time you've been an Australian makes you a good Australian, by the way. We don't mind who you love, and we're happy for you to marry anyone you want. We are a country and we are a movement. We have a sense of Australia. We're not tipping our foreluck and calling ourselves Elizabethans on international trips. I'm much more interested in jobs for Queenslanders, in quality education for Queenslanders, for proper Medicare for Queenslanders. We are interested in working and middle-class Australians, and my goodness, we're going to do our very best to look after them after the next election. Thank you very much.